At the start of Torchlight Infinite's City of Aeterna season, I leveled Gemma Flame of Pleasure. Now, to get one big elephant out of a room, I'm not great at leveling, and if you want the most reliable way to level, check out the guide over on Maxroll. But if you want how I did it, and a way that I personally found successful, here's how I started. You begin as melee, and the game wants you to be melee, which means you're only going to be dropping melee weapons. Luckily, this wasn't a problem for me, because there's a melee weapon called Scorching Words, which also happens to be a caster weapon. In this case, melee just means one-handed hammer, not that it's only suitable for attacks. So after I got a Scorching Word, I said, you know what? I'm now a split fireball build. That worked for, well, a little bit. It wasn't the best, and when I was finishing up with a campaign, my damage was falling off. But then I got very lucky, and I got a hero memory that converted all of my cold damage over to fire, so I leveled as Fire Icy Ring for a bit. I don't advise just doing that as part of your leveling plan. I happened to, and then I sold the memory to get a little starting currency. And I went, well, the build that you've probably been watching for the past minute or so. At least assuming you aren't treating this like second monitor content. And if you are, that's totally fine too. I leveled as the sentry skill, Flame Core. And I have to say, sentry skills seem pretty darn OP. At least in terms of early damage scaling. Toss the 3 of them down, and then all you have to do is dodge. Now at this point, I'm just in T8, and early T8 is where my damage does seem to be falling off in terms of a Flame Core sentries. A lot of that is probably because I have very minimal investment into my gear. And I do not advise planning to take down Tier 7 Traveler like I have in the gear that I've got on. My gear, again, is pretty darn bad. But I also haven't invested all that much time or effort into it. I'm sure in the near future I'll have much better stuff, and if you want an endgame build, get subscribed, I'll be releasing that in the future. But if you just want a build that you can use to level through the Netherrealm and get you into the endgame, maybe 80, maybe Clear Time Mark 7, Kill Watchers, all that stuff, Flame Core Gemma Flame of Pleasure is really good. Surprisingly so, in fact. I didn't think I'd be enjoying sentries. And so without further ado, let's get into it. So first up, my gear. I've got an Imperial Iron Sentry. Number 1, it was a relatively inexpensive helmet, and I specifically bought it for the restores 2% of life and energy shield when a sentry lands a critical strike. This is because sentry builds, generally speaking, don't have any recovery, and not having any recovery makes you very vulnerable. I didn't want to just spam my potion constantly, so this seemed like an okay solution. It having sentry means I can also take a defensive talent. Unfortunately, the downside is I don't have a crit weapon because I'm using wands, and so overall it's a little awkward. Definitely not necessary, but not terrible either. The other legendary I'm using is Pale Mist's Embrace for skill radius, and since I'm stacking a bunch of skill radius, having it applied to area damage. It's been pretty good, and I'd actually keep this one around. For the rest of my gear, it's just stuff that I dropped and pretty much spammed. I'll talk about that in just a second. So I've got a ring with life. I've got another ring with life, some resists, boots with movement speed. This is the most important stat by far. Here you can either get life, spell damage, etc., or if you're really lucky, fire skill gems. More life on chest and gloves. The curse effect is nice, but absolutely not required. For the weapons, any +2 fire skill level is great. If you can't use that, go for Scorching Words, +1 fire skill level. Early on, if you need an alternative, for the amulet, Chain of Resistance is good. The one thing I do not advise is using non-fire skills with Cover the Sun. This is what happens when you use non-fire skills with Cover the Sun. And no, it doesn't respect the sliders, so you can't lower the opacity or the intensity. It's absolutely god-awful. Don't do this. And then for my weapons, my other one is this, because I spent 50 Flame Elementium to elevate the fire skill level. Originally, this was fire skill level, damage to life, spell crit strike damage. I am now 50 Flame Elementium poor, and this doesn't have damage to life anymore. Though it probably still evened out to about the same. Don't do this early. Later on, this is going to be an important part of crafting endgame gear. Stay tuned, I'm going to be coming out with an endgame crafting guide very soon. That's the basics of my gearing. Now, for my Divinity Slates, I actually just took a bunch of these off. Don't mind this. This is because I was trying to adjust shapes. But I'll go over the important ones. The rest, I'm just going to fill with sentry damage and whatever other stats I can roll. Don't mind that too much. The old ones I had in here were really, really bad, like 1 to 2 mods from level 70 or so. and we're not contributing in a meaningful way to my build. The contributing in a meaningful way ones were, number one, this. It's got some order and chaos, which is good at the beginning of an instance, but kind of falls off. It's got some sentry damage, a defensive mod, some sentry crit. This one I actually paid a fair bit for. Actually, is it? No, sorry. Oh yeah, this is the one I paid a fair bit for, because this has fire skill level. And then I rolled life and stuff. The strength isn't useful, but it is what it is. Sentries +1 can be deployed at a time. This is a new thing. I have not tested this, but I have a theory about that, and I'm going to test it live later in the video. Max life, aura effect, and then some order chaos stuff, which would be really OP if I could actually properly invest into it. Basically, what this means is I do a bunch of damage right at the start of an instance. Luckily, as you phase into the city of Aeterna, it counts as a new instance. So that thing that I was testing. +1 sentries. Right now, I have 3 maximum, and I place 3 at a time. But to do that, I'm reliant on multifaceted guard and sentry modification. And I think now that I've gotten a +1, I can drop one of them. Aha! So if you want to free up non-sentry supports and specifically drop sentry modification, what you can do is get +1 on a divinity slate. I'll be testing this further. I just got the slate right now, so I'm not sure if it's great or not. And also it was, I think, moderately expensive, so you shouldn't expect to get it as part of your build. But back to talents. Start in God of Machines. If you don't have a helmet, take Sentry, otherwise grab Shrink Back. Then go into Overly Modified. Fill out all the Sentry nodes along the bottom. Then go into Machinist. You want to get 36 in Machinist as soon as possible. Grab Heat Up. It's not great, but not terrible either. 30% additional damage if the skill was used recently, but the sentries start up slower, so you don't really want to spam them. And also Co-Resonance for the attack speed and cast speed bonuses are applied to sentry frequency, and it even gives them a chance to deal double damage, which is pretty darn OP. For the actual nodes, again, defensive stuff and sentry along the bottom. Last up, Warlord. In Warlord, you get either Sweep or Wildfire. When an enemy gets to low life, you can pause your game and swap to Wildfire for way more damage. Sweep is very good while clearing, though. And then Focus Strike, so you want to drop your sentries directly on the enemy. You need at least 36 points here, so I took a lot of the area damage stuff, a lot of the radius stuff, and fire skill level. For hero traits, level 13, you need Sinful Entanglement. Here you can either increase your max purgatory charges, which I found to be very helpful early, and brand recorded damage, or at later levels, Scorching Lashes outscaled it, especially once I had my level 80 talent. Then Burning Depth makes Purgatory autocast. This is why the build is a bit meh before level 50, but after 50 it takes off. Scorching Trampling, if you have enough fire skill level, this is insane. If you don't have fire skill level, get Flames of Desire. Flames of Desire is quite good, and if you are not stacking a bunch of fire skill level stuff, you should take it instead. I have a lot. I have it on, +3 on my weapons. I have some on slates. Though I am trying Scorching Trampling, and it does seem to be working out so far. Then last up, I really like Dress Liquor, despite the somewhat weird name. It makes Purgatory last a lot longer, and Purgatory becomes more effective the longer the duration. So stacking duration is good. Then for Hero Relic, you either want the Trigger Scorch, or alternatively, additional damage recorded. There are a couple of other good options, but they tend to be expensive. These are just the ones that I found pretty frequently. For memories, Viz taken as, skill radius, skill duration, Viz taken as, mostly running defensive memories right now. If you want to run damage, though, you can get things like this, which is absolutely insane. You can also get a stat that is additional damage that will let you burst stuff down, but it has a 60-second cooldown, so it's not very effective for bosses because the additional damage only lasts 6 seconds. But if you kill a thing in 6 seconds, it's amazing, and the numbers get very scary on it. Expect more on that in the future. So for my supports, I've got Multifaceted Guard, Crit Strike, Elemental Fusion, Fire Pen, Sentry Mod, and Flame Core. As a note, I'm going to be trying the extra Sentry for my Divinity slate and going with added fire damage. Added fire damage is very, very, very good early for boosting up the base damage. In theory, with this, you could do relevant ignite stuff. So maybe Elemental Fusion is a slight damage loss. but there aren't very many other good options that don't cut into it in other ways. For example, you could go mark, but I'm marking via something else. You could go control spell, but that cuts your crit. Could go, let's see, crit damage, but that means you have to have a really good crit rating, which I don't at the moment. Overload requires focus blessing. Spell concentration reduces AoE, which is meh. Fire explosion, a bit less damage, could be the option. My gear is constantly in flux, so I decided to keep this relatively simple. Compound potion, it's healing. Speed Phantom feels really good because it groups enemies up into your sentries. Arcane Circle for spell damage. Mana Boil for even more spell damage. Charged Flames for damage. Ellie Amp for damage. You can go with a resistance or instead if you need defenses. And Magical Source so I don't Soul Candle wise, cooldown recovery speed, slightly helpful for Purgatory. And then some Crit Strike and Radius. Nothing very good here. I will get better candles later. And for Pact Spirits, I'm using a Resistance pet to run through my maps faster. And then I'm just using 2 random level 6s just to get extra Pact Spirit points. Not doing anything special here. And so that's how I've been leveling Gemma Flame of Pleasure. It's the build that took me all the way through Time Mark 7, including T7 Traveler, and all the way up to level 95. As you could tell from this video, my character is far from fully put together or finished. And this time, I very intentionally wanted to show an in-progress character rather than a finished build. I wanted to show my process, and so in the middle of a gear respec, I decided, you know what, let's show some stuff. Speaking of, if you're wondering how I was crafting my weapons, I just got something with a +2 fire, and spammed for a bit until I got a good second mod, then spammed for a bit either until I ran out of plasticity, or I ended up with something useful. And not just crafting my weapons, but this is pretty much how I've crafted all of my character's items so far. There are other things you can do to craft more efficiently, but if you just need something decent, and especially if you need a lot of random stats like I did at this time, without getting into too many specifics, absolutely grab an item level 80-ish base, and you're good to go. Now, in terms of a gameplay, between Brands and Purgatory, your clear speed is super smooth. You don't have any official explodey, but it certainly feels like you do. And using Speed Phantom, you can group things into your sentries. The only thing to be careful of is your sentries have a slight delay before they start dealing damage. And if you're not aware of this, occasionally it can get you killed. Also, this build, at least in the gear that I have and all that, at level 95, without proper divinity slates, yada yada yada, only had about 30 million DPS. And because it only had about 30 million DPS, it was a poor choice to take on Tier 7 Traveler. I did complete Time Mark 7 Traveler. The fight was not clean, the fight was not short, and it is not what I would advise. If I'd spent another hour in the Nether Realm farming up, it would have been absolutely a lot easier. I'd probably have breezed through with 0 deaths. As a note, if you checked out my stream over on Twitch, I did fight Time Mark 6 Traveler and absolutely breezed through. At the time I had like 15 to 20 mil DPS, so about half to 2/3 of what I did in the gameplay that you're seeing in the video. And overall, I don't know what this build is going to become. Maybe I stay with sentries. Maybe I go a different type of sentry. Maybe I go some random attack, or maybe I go back to Icy Ring and play some Spellburst stuff. I don't know what the build's going to be in the future. I just know what's been very efficient at farming so far. And if you want to know more about how the build evolves, do be sure to get subscribed. With that said, thanks for watching. If you need any guides, head over to MaxwellGG, and if you're looking for something else to watch, maybe take a look at the highlights from a developer interview that I did with XD shortly before the season came out. Links to that will be up in the card and down in the description below. Now before I go, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for their continued support. For as low as $1 a month, you can help make videos just like this one possible. Link to support is down below. And with that, thanks for watching. Hopefully you found this interesting. Let me know if you like the slightly more relaxed style of video, showing a work in progress rather than a finished character, and I'll see you again sometime soon.